Welcome everyone. My name is Hannah Renshaw. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the LGBTQ Ministry leader at All Saints Church. And as part of our ministry at this church, we want to provide education for our community and our allies. And part of that work is the talk, a guest speaker series where we invite LGBTQ voices of faith from across the Episcopal Church and beyond to talk to us about their work, their experience, and whatever wisdom they can bring. And so today we are going beyond. We are going beyond, but not too far. For our guest speaker today is a very good friend of All Saints Church, and I'll pass it over to Thomas to introduce us.
Absolutely. Hello, folks. My name is Thomas Diaz. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the staff liaison for the LGBTQ Ministry here at All Saints Church. We are so thrilled to have our guest speaker today with us at the talk, Rabbi Heather Miller. Rabbi Miller is the founder of Keeping It Sacred. Rabbi Miller has demonstrated her knowledgeable and relatable, warm and accessible spiritual leadership since 2008. On any given day, she can be found around town, officiating weddings, studying the Talmud, speaking on any number of topics to various groups, meeting with the community, and working on social justice as well. She genuinely loves mining Jewish sacred texts for timeless wisdom that deepens the meaning in her life. And she loves sharing what she learns with others. Her exploration of Jewish ethics has led her to be a strong advocate for social justice, and she actively engages in solidarity work for a variety of causes. So Rabbi Miller, welcome to the talk.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, so we always like to start off with our guests to kind of give us a little introduction of yourself and what has brought you here.
Well, I just want to thank you, Thomas and Hannah, for creating this podcast. I think, I was speaking recently this past summer at a camp. It's an interfaith queer camp for kids called Camp Quarantine. And at Camp Quarantine, they had me come and talk about being a trailblazer. And I had this, 40-minute talk. And at the end, all of the students kind of gave gratitudes and thanked me for being there. And one of them thanked me for existing. She said, "Thank you for existing." And I just was so taken aback by that comment, because the very act of being here, being out, sharing, what our life lessons have been, sharing what our experiences have been, just being here is a radically amazing act of just opportunity for people to see the joy and the love that we can have for our religious traditions, as well as being queer at the same time, and we don't have to choose. So I would just echo that back. Before we even start today, the beginning, I want to say thank you both for existing. Thank you both for creating this podcast. And I can only imagine the kind of good that it does to reach to people beyond our geographic locations, to really allow people to recognize that they're not alone and that there is community out there for them when and if and how they are able. We're here and we exist. So thank you.
Thank you. And we're happy that you exist. So to share a common compliment on each other's side, we're just so excited. And that the fact that, you are definitely, you are our gym here at All Saints, and you have participated in so many activities. And recently, you were our guest preacher for our Lenten series, which has been a great part of our Lenten journey as we're edging closer to Easter on our end. And I just recognize that as we record this, we're approaching your season of Passover.
That's right.
So yeah,
double trouble, Easter and Passover.
Go. Get ready, everyone.
It's all about redemption.
That's right.
Season of redemption.
Season of redemption, absolutely. Especially during a time like this. Yeah. So one of the things that we do with our guests is we really do explore queer identity and faith. So tell us a little bit about your experience with queer identity and faith.
So good. So yeah, so I can speak about that personally. I can speak about that professionally. I did serve B'Tzelem Chadashim, which is the world's first LGBT founded Jewish congregation. And BCC actually came out of MCC, Metropolitan Community Church. So there was a place where the Christian group of people who identified also as queer came together to organize, to gather together, to lift up gratitude for God and gratitude for their lives. And that really helped make space for so many other congregations. Now there's not one, but there's two queer congregations in Los Angeles that are Jewish, and so many others around the States and around the world. And I just think that, at the outset, to remember that there are so many people not causing people to choose between being a religious person and being a person who identifies as queer. That's such an important understanding at the outset. So, and they're very much like other congregations, both the churches and the temples, right? They're places of marking sacred moments in people's lives, and places of lifting up gratitude, places of gathering in terms of mourning. And B'Tzelem Chadashim was founded in 1972. And the idea is that, just about a decade later, when the AIDS community ravaged the queer community, BCC really became the epicenter of the place of mourning. The senior rabbi at the time, Rabbi Lisa Edwards, was doing funerals every week, and multiple times a week. And the idea that, the congregation really became a place to be tenderhearted. There's a tenderhearted kind of spirituality that's born out of, initial discrimination and hatred, when hatred is directed at a community, but then also when it experiences that kind of loss, deep loss, and the loss amidst a political fight and a backdrop. That kind of a community can really be there for people spiritually, and provide that space, that sacred space within which to gather. So, Jewishly, in the Jewish community in Los Angeles, BCC and other, places where LGBT folks gathered together during the AIDS crisis and beyond, it's really served as a place to be tenderhearted and to hold one another's identity, to witness and recognize and bear witness and recognize one another's identity. That's such an important function, and to be able to do that rooted in religious tradition just deepens that experience. So brilliantly, the leadership of B'Tzelem Chadashim recognized that not only should we start our services on Friday nights, not only should we end our services with the Mourner's Kaddish, which is the prayer for the dead, but they realized that you can't really sit in temple and just jump right into joyful song when your friends are dying, and when you're experiencing all of this hatred. And so they recognize that we should welcome in the mourners at the beginning of the service too. So to be able to make those liturgical changes, those key liturgical changes, and really it wasn't a change because they actually found that this was a practice that had happened about 1,000 years prior, and they just resurrected this practice into this setting. To be so creative like that really creates a liturgy of welcome and inclusion and tenderheartedness, and recognizing that we see you for all that you are, for who you are in all that you are, as an LGBT person, as a Jewish person in this case, or a member of faith, as someone who's in grief, or in whatever way you're coming into this space. It's so important to be able to do that. So first and foremost, I guess I would say that our religious institutions should be able to make room, make sacred space for everyone, and in the LGBT community to be able to do that in these ways. That's how it worked in LA in the 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond.
I find it so fascinating that you're able to just reach back 1,000 years and find something from way back then that applied to the situation. That's just incredible. And I think one of the things that I find really fascinating about Judaism is its connection to history and like this sort of long, unbroken line of people stretching back thousands of years, and how valuable that is in the tradition. So I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about queerness in Judaism and kind of the history of that?
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah. And that's one of the things, when people say, oh, this new thing, this queer thing, it's so new, or in the 70s, I'm sure, especially they were saying that, or now they're saying, trans, I don't know if I can get with these pronouns, and how do you, and I'm like, guys, like, this is in the Mishnah. This is from the year 200, right? Or let's go back further. Let's go back to chapter 1 of Genesis, maybe. Let's take a look at, it's right there in the beginning, right? Bereshit, in the beginning, it's there. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But you were talking about, the ability in Judaism to reach back through, we call it the Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition, that unbroken chain of tradition. The first chapter of Pirkei Avot, which is a book in the Mishnah, which was codified in the year 200, says, on Mount Sinai, Moses received the Torah, right? He received the transmission. Then he gave it to Joshua, and he gave it to the prophets, and he gave it to the elders, and he gave it to the men of great assembly, and they gave it to, the people. And the idea that we do have this unbroken chain of tradition. And again, I'm not saying literally Moses was on a mountain. I'm not saying that, at that time it was actually men of the great assembly, because it was only men at that time. But so excuse the gender terms for all of that. But the idea is that, yes, we are part of this unbroken chain of tradition. And in Judaism, the only thing that's ever stayed the same is that things always change. And the evidence, the primary evidence of that, is that we do not slaughter animals in the temple service anymore. So if that can change that radically, so can other things. But the idea that the Reform movement had in the early 1800s was actually to keep the kernel of the tradition, to keep the essence while removing the husk. So always making sure that we're staying true to our prophetic line, our understanding of justice and pursuing justice in the world, and monotheism, ethics and monotheism. That is what our core is. So if it doesn't relate back to that, then the early reformers gave permission to let it go. And I don't mean the frozen version. But over time we've recognized maybe we don't have to not, we don't have to forbid people from wearing yarmulkes or talit. Anyway, you asked a great question about the idea of the LGBT community in Jewish texts going back. And let's start with that Genesis text, Genesis 1:26 and 27. Right, this idea that God created humanity in God's image. And then it says male and female. I'll use the pronoun he, but it's God, and the way that the Hebrew works, it's with a singular, unspecified gets the masculine. So he created them, male and female. So male and female, God created the first being, which was Adam, right? Adam. I'll call the first being Adam, because we don't know, right? If you say Adam, you think of, that kid who sat next to you in second grade. But if you say Adam, you realize it's not just like a male child. It's Adam, the one who was created in God's image, both male and female. So point A, we don't know what God's gender was, but we know that a being built in the image of God was both male and female. So the idea of gender already, and gender complexity and the breadth of gender, is already there. And in rabbinic, not to be so binary, but the idea that in the Tanakh, right, anytime that you have rich and poor, male and female, it actually is not saying just the rich and just the poor, but it actually means the spectrum that exists in between those two poles. So when we say that God created the first being male and female, it's really that full spectrum of what Adam was. And Adam comes from the root Adom, which means red, and Adama, which means earth. So of the red earth, this creature was created. So, I always like to think about going back and complicate the idea of Eve coming out of Adam. Again, I always think of the movie, but I'm a cheerleader when I read this text because it's so binary. It's like male and female, God created. The idea is actually that if Adam was so complex and Eve was created, the word is Sela, it's not necessarily rib. It could mean side. So if you have this being that's like all encompassing of gender, and then you have Eve being created out of Adam side, it doesn't mean that there's this like male 100%, female 100%, these two, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve situation, right? You have this idea that it's so much more complex than that. And it's all about the way that we interpret it. So, starting there, we have Leviticus. We have that horrible text, 18:22, right? Don't lie with a man as one should lie with a woman. And it is an abomination. The word for abomination or abhorrence is called to'eva. And to'eva, it's really interesting. If you just get your good old concordance, right? Christians can do this too. Everybody can do this, right? Get your concordance. Go look up every time you see the word to'eva or abomination, and you'll see all kinds of things. You know what else is an abomination? Eating creepy crawly things. You know what else is an abomination? Eating fish that don't have scales. You know what else is an abomination? Certain birds, right? There's lots of things that this word is ascribed to. So number one, I think at the most conservative way to read this is it, a man lying with another man as he would a woman. At the very least, you can say it's no worse than eating any of those other things, right? But really beyond that, right? The idea is that to'eva is an abomination. Really was just some of the ways that at the time they were trying to distinguish themselves from the pagan society around them. So if you have a society around you and you're trying to build a new community and you want to distinguish yourself from that community, you have to define yourself as opposite of that community. It doesn't mean that what they're doing is wrong, but you want to define yourself opposite. They might be wearing red, so you wear blue. They might be wearing blue, you wear red. I think about, UCLA versus USC, right? You have to define yourself opposite. Is there anything bad with wearing red? No, but it's what those guys wear, so we better wear blue, right? So those kinds of ideas. So I just want to kind of put that context into it. There's also an amazing movie called, I think it's called Trembling Before God, and Rabbi Sandy Dubowski, I think his name is, Rabbi Sandy, stars in it, and he asks his rabbi, he's an Orthodox rabbi, but as he's growing up, he asks an Orthodox rabbi, like, so does this mean that men can't hold hands? And the rabbi's like, no, men can hold hands. Can men kiss? Yeah, men can kiss. Can men hug? Yeah, men can hug. So then what's this not sleep with a woman like you would, like with another man like you would a woman? They really narrow that down to one particular action and activity. So even if we want to take a look at that text, that, damning 18:22 Leviticus quote, there's so many different ways we can, complicate that. There's so many people that we should be asking these questions. We shouldn't just take it at face value for people saying, see, this is why, homosexuality is a sin. This is not a nuanced understanding of that text. So let's all vow to look closer at the texts that are quoted to us. So those are just, Genesis and Leviticus. And we can take it to in the Mishnah, which is, like I said earlier, codified in the year 200. The rabbis talk about 6 different genders, right? Everyone says, oh, these new transgender people, what are they doing? What do you mean? This is in the Mishnah. The year 200, they identified not 1, not 2, not 3, but 6 different gender categories. You have Zahar, which is male. Zahar comes from the word like a pointy sword, so it's referencing a phallus. We have nekeva, which means a crevice. So that's like a vagina for a female, and I'm talking about embodied, bodies. I'm not talking about identity, so just mention that. Androgynous, which is both female and male, which comes from the Greek, right? We have tumtum, which is an indeterminate sexual status. We have Ailonit, which are female at birth that then become male. They have more, during puberty, they have more male characteristics and often are infertile. And then you have the Saris, which are men who then lack a penis. And that could also happen due to, events in the world and in life that happen. But so there's all of these different gender categories, and the way that the rabbis handle this beautiful spectrum and way to describe lots and lots of different bodies and genders is so sad. They say, okay, well, we're going to have two categories, and we're going to put the first category of Zahar in one category, that's male, and then everyone else is in the female category. And that's what they do to it. And so they flatten out gender, this like beautiful spectrum, this wide variety, and they flatten it out. And so that's where we who are LGBT identified, queer rabbis and leaders in the Jewish community, we're trying to bring back that spectrum, bring back that idea, that recognition that the spectrum has always been there. And how can we keep at the center the idea that everyone is, back to that Genesis text, everyone is made B'Tzelem Elohim, in the image of God, which means that we can all flourish as a society if every individual in society is able to flourish and be our whole selves and with our whole truth. That's when we're all going to be able to flourish. So let's recognize the fullness of the human experience and affirm, where people are. So there's a few more things about, the different couples in the Torah about, Ruth and Naomi, Jonathan and David. We have these two rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. There's lots of couples who are identified as well, and there's some Talmudic texts as well, but I'll just stop there for now.
Well, and that might be a good segue for another question
Sure.
in terms of couples. And just one, this is just thank you. And I think, before I go into what I was going to reflect on is, I still think that there is such a hesitance of just accepting everything that you just stated with us and everything you just shared. And I, and obviously that hesitantness and maybe just plan out just wanting to be completely ignorant to the knowledge that this is not something that you're making up or something that, progressive theologians are making up. It's like, no, this stuff is like, it's there. Like, all you have to do is go back and be like, oh, they said this in 200. Got it. This is not like something's been made up. And, you see the push that's coming from, from conservative parts of religious entities of just saying, no, now you're just making it up. And now, you're just trying to make this as easy and accessible for folks. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point, and that's the tension that lies when we're trying to do this form of work, and like we say at All Saints, this radical inclusion work of saying like it's not just in just putting a walking doormat at the door. Like there's so much more to that. It's like, no, then we have to, really undertake how we can educate everyone to understand why we have this welcome doormat, right? It's just not because we just need them here. There's reasons why we're here, and right, and the past has actually showed us a way to get there, and it seems like midway there was just like this disconnect that happened, and everybody just kind of went on their own or full to their own folds there, and it went a different way. So you said something that actually I've been processing as you've been sharing everything, is that you correct me if I got jotted it down incorrectly, but you said that one of the best things about tradition is that things always change, right? And that is at best what a good tradition can be, is that because they accept that things are constantly changing. Derry used the word evolving to something else. And so, you're mentioning about couples. well, last week for a lot of Christians, in particular, those who identify as Roman Catholic, got the news, from their head spiritual leader that not only is this not anything that God could ever bless, but that but that because of who you are, it's such rooted in deep sin that why would God want to bless that? What's the point of God blessing, right, a particular love that you might have for someone else, or the way that you want to share that love with another person? I bring that up because, as I'm a former Roman Catholic myself, and having to go through that constant experience of like, well, here comes another line coming, the pipeline from the Vatican. But this time around, when it came out, and I was hearing, just the arguments that were being made for it, it was really the first time where I just thought, at this point, there has to come, I should say, there has to come a point where we have to draw the line of saying, there has to be now just a complete, I guess you could say, ignorance to just what knowledge and what we know from the past and what's already there. And as we keep kind of experiencing these forms of these spiritual leaders, primarily, I guess you can say from a conservative side, even though I know people would argue about the spectrum where Pope Francis is, because sometimes he leans progressive, sometimes just goes the completely right wing way. And we're like, okay, what happened here? So when you talk about identity coming particularly from scripture, and now that we have all of the other commentaries that you mentioned, what about couples in marriage that is always on the front line of pushback from any religious entity of just saying, nope, we can't do it?
So I have a yes. So my in-laws are Catholic too, and my wife was raised Catholic, so we definitely have been watching that situation as well. And I know that it's devastating for young people who are already feeling isolated to now feel isolated from the man who they see is the representative of God speaking. So I can't even imagine, what that experience is like to hear that. And I just hope that all of those who will find that news devastating, that they find their place somewhere, and that they find community somewhere like All Saints Church, or, wherever else they can find it. So I just, my heart goes out to those kids. I thought you were going to ask me about my 4 weddings, right? Because we had to have 4 weddings. We had to have to the same person. Don't worry. It was just like, not that it should be worried. Sometimes divorce is important. Okay, we just go back there. But number 1, right? I had my domestic partnership. Then, Prop 8 came and slammed down my right to get married. So we said, you know what? We're still going to get married. We had a spiritual wedding in 2012. Then the day that it was possible for us to get legally married in 2013, we went down to the courthouse. It was awesome. Every time a new couple was coming out with their papers, we were all cheering. We got the bailiff so angry, and he was like, shh, people are having divorces in the next room. And we're like, sorry. So then everyone came out. We did jazz hands every time someone came out. And it was so awesome. And the guys in front of me, they didn't have anyone to marry them. So I said, I'll marry you because I'm clergy. And I married them on the front steps. And they had been together for over 30 years, like 37 years. So just, the ability. Oh, and then sorry, the 4th time was our 10-year domestic partnership anniversary. We went to Las Vegas and had Elvis marry us just for fun, because we were in Vegas on the anniversary. So why not? For a Janet Jackson concert. But anyway, my wife's 40th birthday.
Oh.
And our son's 4th birthday. But anyway, so the idea is that, marriage really does matter. And, one of my earliest mentors, Tori Osborne, she was never thinking about getting married. She, was an advocate in especially the lesbian community and the LGBT community. And when she was able to get married, she just told me about how fundamentally powerful it was to recognize that society does this funny thing when people get married, and it recognizes your relationship as like real in a different way than when you're married. And you say, this is my boyfriend or girlfriend or my partner, or my, the person I'm dating. It has a really different valence than if you say my spouse, right? There's like a weight to it that society knows that that's the cue, that like, this is what it is. And so, when she was able to get these, wedding presents from all different cultures and traditions, she really recognized how that how society treats your relationship in a different way. And that's why marriage is such an important thing to fight for. I would also add that, there's over 1,001 rights that you get when you get the ring on it, right? Get married. Things like, easy things like taxes and insurance, but also things like, not having to testify against your spouse in court, or the really important ones, which are medical decision making. And so many of the couples in the 80s that were dying of AIDS, the partner who had been their partner for years and years and years, decades, couldn't make the end of life care decisions because they couldn't get married in life. And in death, the parents were in charge, even if the parents had estranged the child, the now adult gay person. So, marriage is really, really, really significant. But when you talk about it as a misunderstanding, I think about my rabbinical school class. There were 18 of us in my class in New York. There were like 60 of us through 3 different campuses, but in my campus there were 18 of us, and we recognized that a third of our class was gay. And we had this one professor, Rabbi Eugene Borowitz, may his memory be a blessing. He's deceased now, but he had this reputation when the seminary started. The seminary being Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. I'm saying that because there's a conservative seminary that they call themselves a seminary. I don't want it to get mixed up. But when Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion started allowing LGBT identified folks to enter the ordination program in '83, he started asking people before he signed their smicha, their paper that says that, yes, he agrees that they're rabbis. He started asking them, are you gay? Because he wouldn't want to sign it if people were gay. And then after a few years, he thought that was a bit too uncomfortable. So he just decided to not sign anybody. So he didn't sign anybody since like the 80s, right? And then here comes our class. And he made the mistake of, for our final paper in theology class, he let us ask him a question. So we asked him, hey, Professor Borowitz, so we understand that you're not going to sign our smicha, and it has something to do with being gay. Can you, that you don't want to, we recognize that you don't want to sign anybody. So we thank you for not asking us if we're gay or not, and, creating this 2-tiered system. At least you're not doing that. But, what's the impetus for you not signing it? And God bless him, he was very introspective and thoughtful. And he just took a moment and he introspected and he said, I had children with my wife and I thought it was the best thing in the world. And I really believe that to be a rabbi, to be a full human being, you should have kids. And we're like, we're gay. We're not like infertile. Like, what do you? And he's like, oh, and we're like, and plus, like, what about the straight people who are infertile? Like, would you still sign their smichas? He's like, oh, and then we're like, and we can adopt, right? And he's like, oh, so, and he was in his 80s, okay? Like, may we all be able to really consider and reconsider and continue to grow and consider the youth and, younger people who are younger than us and people who are older than us who might challenge us to think differently. But, over that year, I thanked him. I actually emailed him personally. Thank you for, considering it. And I really appreciate what you said. I'm so glad that you had children and it was so important to you and, that you're thinking about things. So, 2 or 3 years later, when I got my smicha, my piece of paper saying I was a rabbi, actually made a little email, it was not a phone call, it was an email to Dr. Borowitz. And I said, hey, do you think you can meet me in the library? I've got something to ask you. And it said that I'd like to ask you to sign my smicha. And he met me in the library. And I brought my pen and my smicha. And I said, look, and I just went into it. I had a tumor when I was 10. I don't know if I can have kids. I don't know that I will want to have kids. I don't know if I'll get married. I don't know who that person will be, But, if you ask if I'm queer, I'm queer. And, and I really appreciate what you said about, how important it is. And, I just wondered if you might sign my thing. And I kept talking, and he's like, Heather, give me the pen. And I just felt like the we're coming up on Passover. Passover means that we've come out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt, but Mitzrayim really means a narrow place. And you're in oppression, you're in this really narrow place. And then, and literally in the Israelites, when they were going through the Red Sea, they were in this narrow place and they came out to the fullness of their own freedom. And I really, in that moment when he said, give me the pen, I just felt like the fountain, if it was a fountain pen, it couldn't have been more perfect, but it wasn't. I don't remember. It was archival quality. I do remember getting that, but it, so it wouldn't fade. But, just making sure that I felt like a liberating quality when he said that he would actually, sign it. So I think that you're right, that there's misunderstandings, and that is why people refuse to recognize LGBT relationships. And I hope that, this act of coming out, bravely coming out, Tori Osborne's book called Coming Home to America was instrumental in the early 90s. It's important that we come out so people know who we are, and they recognize the sanctity of the lives that we lead.
What a great story, first of all. That's I don't know. I think that's my prayer for everyone, is for them to have that moment where things click and minds are changed, and that moment. It was just so vivid in my mind, that sort of that realization. I think that's just great that someone, especially someone, I don't know, sort of in their 80s. I guess there's this sort of sense that old people are stuck in their ways and minds can't be changed. But no, that everyone can continue to learn, and that's great. I wanted to pivot a little bit because right near the beginning, you mentioned about the kind of the shared history between BCC and MCC, and I didn't know that. That's really rather delightful, kind of that interfaith sort of partnership and cooperation, and then you mentioned as well having an interfaith family, and your wife also coming from a Catholic background, and so and a lot of the work that you do is interfaith related as well. So, kind of how has that affected your journey and your perspective on these things, and what do you think kind of having these conversations between faiths can teach us?
Well, I definitely, I've been coming to All Saints Church for Christmas Eve services for about 7-8 years now. Thank you for having me read Isaiah every year and just participate. But, hearing Ed Bacon and hearing Mike Kinman preach every year, centering love, has really been inspiring to me. And my dad being a Unitarian, their churches all have rainbow flags off the side of the buildings and things, and just recognizing that at the center, we should always have human dignity, and recognizing that, I always want to center communities that are doing that and uplift any community that's doing that. I was just at the Central Conference of American Rabbis. It's a rabbinic organization of many Reform rabbis, all the Reform rabbis who are members. we have a conference every year. And last week we had Rabbi Shai Held give a sermon talk about if we were really serious about religion, we would never make it past the first chapter of Genesis, because we would just live the idea that everyone is made in the image of God. And he got into all of the different aspects of that, about how, we're made in the image of God, and that means that, God is manifest in the universe, and we can give thanks for that, and that there's a myriad of ways. And, and he didn't mention this story, but one of my favorite stories or ideas is that the rabbis in the Talmud, which is codified around the year 500, they said that so great is God that, so great, first it goes, so great is human that they can create one stamp and make a coin, each coin exactly the same as the next. And so great is God that God can create the same stamp and stamp out every single human being different from one another, right? That idea that there is so much beauty in diversity and intentional diversity. So any community that is centering that is a community that I want to affirm and uphold and support and cheer on, and do everything I can that that they're living Genesis 1 as simply and functionally that way. So the way that All Saints really centers love, centers that radical inclusion, but it's almost not even like radical inclusion for All Saints. It's just the part of the fabric of who you are, right? It is a diverse community. It's a beautiful community that upholds and affirms the beauty of the uniqueness of each stamped human being in the world. And so, I find great connection. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Larry Hoffman who also talks about how religion is kind of like a bicycle wheel with the different spokes, or you could think of it like a pizza. But the idea that at the center where the wheel is connected to the bike is universalism, and at the edges is particularism. And if you think of every slice of that bicycle wheel as a different religious tradition, you recognize that all of us in our different religious traditions that are more universal in our outlook, i.e. affirming Genesis 1, or in any other way affirming human dignity, are closer to each other than we are to our co-religionists who are more extremist. And that's the way I feel about All Saints Church, and that's the way that I feel about anyone who's really placing love and justice and the idea that every human being should be able to be the fullness of who they are in all that they are, to be affirmed in that. That's where I want to be.
And that's where we want to be there too. Always.
You are there.
We're there. Boy, that's and we say that, one of our I guess you could say our key mantras we often say is like, whoever you are, wherever you find yourself in the journey of faith, there's a place for you here. Yeah. It's been instructed that that we're at, Mike often says like, we're at this table together. And I remember once, I think it was Mike who said it, can't recall, but I loved whoever coined, I don't know if it was just a coin of phrase, whatever, but that it talked about how often at tables, you kind of know when you're not welcomed or not, but sometimes there's a push within yourself, like, you know what? No, I'm tired of being rejected from this table. So no, it's okay. I'll bring my lawn chair and then I'll sit here with you, because if I can't have an actual seat, I'll bring my lawn chair and then I can join you at the table. And I think it kind of speaks about too, what as queer folks and those who identify LGBTQ, that there are times where we have to be almost that daring and almost, as I say, audacious, to be like, I'm tired of not being invited. I'm just going to show up and I'm just going to bring my lawn chair and sit at the table, because I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm not going to wait for permission or from a form of an invite to come sit, because I know I'm worth sitting at this table. And whether maybe it's not a religious table, maybe it's a table having a seat on Congress, or having a seat, with any particular leadership role that we have throughout our country, or even taking a seat, you know, as an, you know, which we often don't see often, especially in the elementary, middle school, and high school settings of like being an out and proud educator, you know, and often that struggle that brings. Um, and then without a doubt, you know, when it comes to being clergy, you know, even though, you know, even, you know, speaking on the Episcopal Church, you know, even though we have our clergy who do identify within LGBTQ, but boy, does it come often at a price. And sometimes you're really having to really convince those of a hierarchy of power that not only do I want to sit at the table, but I also want to be known and be seen as a whole person, right? Because sometimes it can often is that you're granted a seat, but then there's this kind of like connotation of like, well, maybe not fully whole, but at least you're here, right? That's good enough.
Mhm.
And you know, and that's always, you know, that's what, that tension that lies there all the time with the work. But I think you beautifully, and you know, boy, do we, I would have to say I'm representing All Saints, you know, so humbled by the way you just, um, you know, reviewed of who we are with our table, and that, you know, that we do constantly work for that, and it's just, it's embedded in our mission, in our core values. Um, so I'm saying that that's All Saints stuff, and obviously, you know, that's why you're here, and we love you for that. But tell us a little bit about keeping it sacred. What is this beautiful place that you have developed? And I, folks, if you have not gone to the website, keepingitsacred.com, you're missing out, because there's just there, it's beautiful, and it's, well, there's just content that I'm still finding myself like wanting to dig through, and just, yeah, tell us a little bit more about it.
So much content, so much
Yeah.
content. And actually, I have a web series that's also a podcast called People Keeping It Sacred. And actually, I interviewed someone named Serena Cerezos Poon, who is a minister of megachurch daughter who came out as queer, and she talks about her story coming out. So if you want another queer voice of
Yes.
someone in the Christian community coming out, definitely, I think it's episode 4 of season 1 of People Keeping It Sacred. And stay tuned for season 2, because I'm going to be interviewing Mike Kinman, Reverend Mike Kinman. So that's going to be awesome.
Right.
So keeping it sacred. I named it Keeping It Sacred with the acronym KITS, KITS, after my grandmother, who always endowed in me a love of Judaism, a love of learning, boldness, verve for life, zest for life. And it's a place where people can encounter sacred texts as in an accessible, relevant, and empowering kind of way, the way that my grandma always made me feel whenever I was with her. So sadly, she died last year in June, but she was the age of 100. So I had a lot of amazing years with her.
Wonderful.
So keeping it sacred is, you know, I didn't specify if it was just Jewish or all inclusive, because again, I really see so many beautiful aspects of different communities, not necessarily only in the Jewish faith. So we do a ton of interfaith work, as you noted earlier. In terms of justice, in terms of, you know, economic understandings of the world, in terms of you know, gender as that relates to our identity and just intersectionality that way. So we do that. We do Talmud study, so that 500-year-old text, every single day we study another page of Talmud, and then we have a little group, a text group that we study every week, and we review the past week's readings. And, you know, speaking of the table, everyone has a place at the table, and we have people of all genders there, and you know, different ages, and as part of our community, it's in the fabric of our community. I asked someone who's in our community who does DEI work, and she's, you know, an amazing scientist, and I asked her to help us think about a diversity statement. She's like, what do you mean? You are the diversity statement. Look at the community. Like, look at what it is. And I was flattered by that, but I don't know if we need to have an explicit statement, but I'm here to say that, you know, yes, the answer is yes. And yes, and the and is that, you know, we're all going to continue. We're not going to just say like, we're inclusive, done, we get the sticker, right? Like, we're committed to continuing to do the work. I'm constantly in some, awareness raising class of, whether it's the Wellesley Racial Justice Initiative group or, the mikveh, which is a ritual, Jewish ritual bath, is talking about, what does it mean to be a Jew of color in a conversion setting? What does it mean to do conversion, mikveh for trans bodies, like for people who have trans bodies, and what does that mean for the mikveh, this ancient ritual? I'm constantly reading different books and trying to understand and better align and be a responsible person who, and a responsible organization who can really continue to encourage people to explore and interrogate our own values and actions and make sure that they're aligned, and make sure that we're doing what we can. So I've also done some consulting for institutions with regard to diversity, but all of the proceeds that I get from that, I give right back to the community, because I believe in, for me, not making money off of the racism, but really it's my calling, it's my responsibility to make sure that I can do what I can, lend my skills and talents to doing that work. So we have a lot. There's a lot. If anyone's ever interested in Judaism in any regard, I'm sure we have all kinds of services. I built it off of the All Saints model of welcoming everyone at Christmas Eve services. So this year we welcomed people of all different faiths to our Rosh Hashanah, High Holiday, New Year celebration. I'm doing an all faith Passover Seder this coming Sunday, although this is probably being recorded and broadcast after that. But check out the website. You're sure to find all kinds of things. But thank you to All Saints Church for co-sponsoring that Passover Seder that's coming up 1 p.m. on Sunday. So just, we're here, we exist, and we are affirming. So whoever comes is more than welcome, and will always find a place to be affirmed and celebrated. And you'll always find a tender heart to listen to what you're going through spiritually as well. And of course, we'll drop a lot of Torah, Talmud, Mishnah kinds of quotes and texts. And hopefully that kind of content will be bolstering to you as well. Don't take my word for it. I feel like LeVar Burton, but you don't have to take my word for it. Let me show you this book that tells you all these things. We do that a lot.
Nice. That sounds amazing fun. So as we're approaching the end of our time together, I guess, if people want to find out more, or if people want to join in on what Kits is doing, or if they want to find something to read to kind of dig into this more, what kind of resources or kind of social media presence or anything else would you recommend people check out?
Sure. So, people can contact me anytime. That's great. Rabbi Miller at keepingitsacred.com, keepingitsacred.com itself. We have a YouTube channel as well, and the podcast. So all of that content is there. You can access all of that through the website if you want to just go there, one-stop shop. We also have an Instagram page at Keeping It Sacred, or at Hey Rabbi, that's HEA Rabbi, where we post different things. And then as far as like books, I'll just recommend this book. This is a book called Where Pride Dwells, a celebration of LGBTQ Jewish life and ritual, edited by Rabbi Denise Egger, who's the founder of Congregation Kol Ami, which is in West Hollywood. So we have two LGBT Jewish congregations, the first being BCC, Beth Chaim Chadashim, that's bcc-la.org, or you can go over to see Kol Ami. But this book is called Where Pride Dwells, and it gives you lots of liturgical understandings and blessings. I've got a blessing that I do every year, or that I did before the pandemic. Before we do the Pride Parade, we have an interfaith service. So there's a blessing for all of those who have come before us, blessing for those who died. And there's just like other older books like Kulanu. I just want to show, like, this is from 2003. Like, this is not new. That's 17 years old now. I remember when this was new, right? We have all, there's books. Definitely check out the Sandy Dubowski film. For me, that was really enlightening. Along with, but I'm a cheerleader. The movie, I think, like, if anyone can make homophobia funny, it's RuPaul. And it's not funny, but it's a really great analysis of this idea of Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and the way that they deal with it is fun. I like movies like that. Also, that Sandy Dubowski movie, right? The one of Trembling Before God was really, really interesting, especially if you're interested in the Orthodox community. I can recommend Orthodox congregations also that are more welcoming toward the LGBT community. There's a group called JQ International that also has a warm line. So it's not a hotline, it's not 24/7, but they call it a warm line because it's not 24/7, but it's a lot of hours, so that people can contact parents as well. And BCC is amazing, really an amazing community. Rabbi Jillian Cameron and Cantor Yuval Porat are there. Rabbi Lisa Edwards was there for a long time, and she's the senior rabbi emerita. She's amazing. And CBST, there's a congregation called Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York. So there's a lot of amazing people. Oh, and one more I'll give you is for Talmud study, there's a group called Savara, which is a radical queer inclusion space for Talmud study, which is great too. So that's Rabbi Benay Lappe, Benay Lappe, Lappe. So there's a ton of groups and resources. If you need a listening ear, let me know. Just go ahead and contact me. Very happy to connect with people and be there as a resource as well. And Camp Quarantine, don't forget Camp Quarantine. Back to where it all began. Thank you all for existing. Thank you for interviewing me today.
Yes, Rabbi Miller, thank you so much just for being with us at the talk and all that you do with that for us here at All Saints Church. And thank you for existing.
Thank you. Keep doing your righteous work.
Well, what we often do is ask our guests to pray us out. So if you would you like to close it with a prayer?
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, let's do something extemporaneous. So please get in the posture of prayer, however you define that. And prayer, by the way, in the Hebrew tradition is lahit palel, which actually means to self-reflect. So it's not necessarily to pray to someone or to another entity, but it can be a space of introspection as well. I am going to give a blessing to God, but feel welcome to expand that as however you would like, and see how this prayer reflects for you. So in our posture of prayer. Misha Berach Avotenu v'Imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah. May the one who blesses our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel and Leah, the one who created David and Jonathan, who created Ruth and Naomi, who created Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who created all of those who came before us and all of those who are yet to be. The one who created every human being and all of the beautiful diversity that we experience. Thank you so much for this time that we've had together today to reflect upon our experience. Thank you for the time to reflect upon my tradition, the Jewish tradition, as it relates to the LGBT community. Thank you for bringing us together in great community, for the three of us to continue on in these bonds of friendship and in recognition of the holy and sacred work that we are each doing. May queer people all over the world band together and bond together over the express mission of magnifying love throughout the world. May we all find ways in which we can lift one another up, claim our sacred space, our seat at the table, and be a light unto one another. May all those who have hardened hearts soon recognize the joy and love that can be fostered when all of us live our truths proudly and joyfully. And may it come soon and speedily. Baruch atah Adonai, Shomea Tefillah. Blessed are you, God, who hears our prayer. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Rabbi Miller. Thank you so much.